Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really jumping into something that's moving incredibly fast and is deeply complex.
hmm
The conflict between Israel and Iran, which has seriously escalated.
Yeah, it's not just another news cycle item.
Exactly. It feels like a genuinely critical moment globally. And, if you're trying to keep up, it can feel almost impossible, like trying to grab smoke.
hmm
So that's why we're here. We've sifted through a whole stack of sources, the immediate news from places like Reuters, Al Jazeera, but also deeper analysis from think tanks, RAND, for instance, plus official statements.
Right.
And our mission, really, is to boil it all down, cut through that noise, collect the key pieces of information, and hopefully leave you feeling like you've got a real handle on it without being completely overwhelmed.
And for this deep dive, we're really aiming to connect those dots for you. It's not just about, the missile counts or the immediate strikes. We want to explore the ripple effects, how the world's reacting, the jitters in the economy, and what this, pretty unprecedented shift could actually mean for the future. Not just the Middle East, but potentially much wider. Understanding why this matters right now is, I think, crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's set the scene. Because what we've seen over, the last 5 days or so, this isn't just another minor flare-up in a region that's always tense.
No, not at all.
The sources are describing it as something fundamentally different. We're seeing direct hostilities and overt military exchange. How is this different from the sort of proxy clashes we usually hear about, and what are the immediate flashpoints that got us here?
That's the critical point, isn't it? It is a dramatic escalation.
Mm-hmm.
Since about June 13th, give or take, Israel launched this operation they're calling Rising Lion.
Okay.
And our sources suggest they've hit over 100 Iranian military and, significantly, nuclear sites. We're talking major locations, Natanz, Isfahan, even hitting targets near Tehran. And it wasn't just infrastructure. There was also the assassination of a senior commander, Ali Shadmani, and that came after his predecessor was also killed, which really underlines the strategic targeting going on.
And Iran's response, faced with such direct hits on their own soil.
Well, Iran hit back hard. It's been a clear tit for tat. They launched literally hundreds of missiles and drones aimed directly at Israel.
At cities.
Yeah, major cities, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Herzliya were all targeted. Yeah. Now, the key thing is Israeli defenses intercepted most of them.
Mm-hmm.
But the sheer scale and the fact that it was a direct state-to-state attack, that's undeniable. The intent is clear.
So this isn't just like another round of skirmishes. You mentioned RAND experts calling this a shift from proxy clashes to overt kinetic warfare. Can you unpack that a bit? What does that actually mean for someone trying to grasp the difference? And why is this 5-day period so much more significant than past tensions?
Yeah, that's really the core of it. It fundamentally changes the nature of the conflict. For decades, Israel and Iran have been locked in this, shadow war.
Right, through proxies.
Exactly. Fought indirectly. Hezbollah in Lebanon, militias in Syria, Yemen, you name it. Often deniable, kind of below the radar of direct state-on-state war.
Mm-hmm.
What we've seen these last 5 days is different. It's direct, declared even. Israel hitting Iran, Iran hitting Israel, no plausible deniability needed.
Okay.
And that shift to overt kinetic warfare, it has immediate serious implications. Especially for Iran's nuclear program, it's now clearly a direct military target. And it completely reshapes, how the U.S. has to approach the Middle East. It potentially demands a clearer stance, maybe even more direct involvement. It really redefines the whole chessboard.
And speaking of the U.S., the language coming out of Washington seems unusually sharp, very strong alignment with Israel. What have we actually heard from U.S. leaders? Because some of these statements sound pretty extraordinary. And is this translating into actual military moves?
Oh, absolutely unequivocal. The language is stark, really a departure from typical diplomatic talk. You had former President Trump at the G7 summit making some very strong statements.
Like what?
Calling for Iran's unconditional surrender, a direct warning that the U.S. knows Supreme Leader Khamenei's location, even urging people to evacuate Tehran.
Wow, that's intense.
It is. He flat out rejected ceasefire options, saying the U.S. wants a real end to Iran's nuclear ambitions. Now, some analysis suggests this is, shock and awe, diplomacy, try to force immediate capitulation.
High stakes.
Very high stakes. It could work or it could backfire, cornering Iran into escalating further because they see no way out. And it's not just words. The U.S. has moved military assets, refueling tankers, warships, possibly bombers are being positioned in the region.
Okay.
The stated goal is deterring attacks on U.S. interests. Officially, they deny direct military engagement, but that forward posture sends a very clear message.
And what about the air war itself? Sources mention Israel claiming air superiority. What does that mean in practice, and are there any caveats we should keep in mind?
Yes, the Israeli Air Force has claimed they've achieved air superiority over Iran, apparently operating through Syrian airspace as well.
Hmm.
That suggests a real ability to strike deep into Iran.
What?
But experts quickly point out the caveat. Iran has invested heavily in deeply buried nuclear facilities, designed precisely to survive conventional airstrikes.
Right, like Natanz.
Exactly. So to completely neutralize that kind of hardened infrastructure, the assessment seems to be it might actually require direct U.S. help, specifically things like their bunker buster bombs. So even with claimed air superiority, there might be limits when it comes to Iran's most protected assets.
Okay, so this deep dive isn't just about the military back and forth or the political statements. It's really about the shockwaves this sends out globally. When a conflict flares up like this, especially in such a critical region, you expect immediate economic tremors. Let's talk about those first. What are the sources telling us about market reactions? Why did things move so fast?
Yeah, the economic impact was almost immediate and pretty significant. It was driven by, well, raw fear and uncertainty in the markets.
Oil prices.
Spiked. Crude jumped over $1 a barrel very quickly. And that's not just speculation. It's tied directly to fears about shipping through the Strait of Hormuz.
That vital choke point.
Absolutely. Something like a fifth of the world's oil goes through there. Any hint of disruption sends energy markets into a panic. And that fear then reveled out oil stocks, defense stocks. They went up naturally.
Sure.
But broader stock markets, equities globally, they dipped. Investors basically ran for cover, moving away from risk. Classic flight to safety.
And it's not just the financial markets reacting, right? Governments, international organizations, they're clearly worried. We're seeing evacuations, even legal questions being raised. What kind of responses are we seeing on the diplomatic and humanitarian fronts? What does that tell us?
It's a really mixed bag internationally, which tells you a lot about the different interests at play. Diplomatically, you had the G7 leaders coming out, reaffirming Israel's right to self-defense, calling Iran a source of instability. That lines up pretty closely with the U.S. rhetoric. But importantly, they also urged de-escalation more broadly. So it's kind of a dual message, support for Israel, but also real anxiety about this spinning further out of control.
And people getting out. Evacuations.
Yes, several countries have started pulling their citizens out.
Yeah.
Egypt, Czech Republic, Slovakia, China are all mentioned. And there was a specific detail about birthright.
The educational trips to Israel?
Yeah, that organization, they apparently organized a cruise ship quite quickly to get about 1,500 tourists out of the area. That really highlights how sudden the perceived danger became.
Okay, and then there are the humanitarian and legal aspects.
Right, and these are raising serious concerns. The IAEA, the UN's nuclear watchdog, they confirmed damage in the Natanz, those underground facilities. That's significant. The WHO, World Health Organization, they're warning about the rising risks to civilians and also environmental damage. And then you have international legal experts weighing in.
Condemning the strikes.
Some are, yeah.
Yeah.
Condemning Israel's strikes as potentially violating international law. The concerns are around proportionality, basically. Was the force used excessive compared to the military goal? And also the documented civilian casualties and damaged infrastructure. So there are already big questions about whether this conflict is staying within the lines of established international law. That debate is definitely going to continue.
And beyond the U.S. and the G7 bloc, what about other big global players? Russia, China. Are they aligned or taking different stances?
Definitely more nuanced responses there. Russia, for instance, has offered to mediate, but at the same time, they've explicitly called the Israeli strikes illegal.
Interesting. So positioning themselves differently.
Exactly. Potential broker,
Yeah.
but also criticizing actions taken by G7 allies. Other countries like Jordan, Qatar, France, they've also expressed varying degrees of concern or criticism about the escalation. So no single unified global voice, really. Each country is calculating its own interests and leverage.
Okay, so after digesting all of this, what does it really mean for you listening, trying to get a clear picture of this really complex, fast-moving situation? Let's try to boil down the core facts from these last 5 crucial days. What are the absolute must-know takeaways?
I think the key facts really define this new phase. First, duration. 5 days, roughly since June 13th, of this overt military back and forth.
Okay.
Second, casualties. The numbers reported around 224 Iranians, that's military and civilian combined, and 24 plus Israeli civilian casualties.
Right.
Third, civilian impact.
Hmm.
Beyond just casualties, think evacuations from Tehran, damage to infrastructure, and specifically damage confirmed at the Natanz nuclear site.
Got
Fourth, global impact.
Yeah.
We've seen those oil price spikes, market jitters, major powers shifting their military stances, and countries pulling their citizens out.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, the legal angle. You've got the IAEA and WHO raising flags, plus these critiques under international law about proportionality and civilian harm. Those are the pillars of the current situation, I'd say.
That's really helpful to just crystallize where things stand. So now looking forward, what should we be watching for? What are the critical developments that are going to tell us where this conflict is headed next, say, in the coming days or weeks?
Yeah, there are a few really key things to keep an eye on. First, Iran's next move. Do they continue with these direct missile and drone attacks? Or do they maybe shift back towards using their proxies more, militias in Lebanon, Yemen,
Hmm.
kind of returning to the shadow war tactics?
Okay.
Second, U.S. involvement. Is it going to deepen? Will we see them actually deploy bombers or maybe even conduct direct strikes themselves? Moving beyond just deterrence into actual engagement is a huge potential turning point.
Right.
Third, the wider international reaction, especially from players like China and Russia. How do they respond? And do the G7 allies stick together, or do cracks appear in their approach?
Mm-hmm.
And finally, maybe the most critical long-term question, the impact on Iran's nuclear program. Will these strikes actually set it back significantly? Or could they have the opposite effect, paradoxically pushing Tehran to accelerate towards weaponization because they feel they need it for deterrence? These are the threads that will really shape what happens next.
Those are definitely the threads to watch. But stepping back for a second, as you reflect on this, unprecedented escalation and just how interconnected everything is, what's the bigger question this whole deep dive leaves you thinking about? As this really traumatic situation unfolds, one question kind of hangs in the air for me. In a world that's so tightly linked by trade, by diplomacy, by security, can any major conflict truly stay contained? Or does every flashpoint like this now inevitably carry the seeds of potential global transformation? Something to think